Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. We're glad to host you today on our women-only panel. And I'm joined by Rosina and Elizabeth to discuss how AI is actually changing the world of low carbon energy in Africa. I'll start by a quick introduction of the panelists and myself, and then we will go in a discussion around the topic. So my name is Shinez. I work for Google. I'm an industry manager in the Middle East and Africa. I spent a couple of years in the region to not disclose too much. Before that, I used to work at McKinsey, where I led digital transformations and advanced analytic transformations. And before that, I was very lucky to spend a bit of time in Kenya, where I worked with Kiva on clean tech projects and mainly small solar grids. And I saw firsthand the impact of technology on how societies are changing there. So I'm really glad to be talking about how AI is actually changing the footprint in Africa. And I'll let Elizabeth introduce herself.
Thank you so much, Jeanette. Hi, my name is Elizabeth, and I'm the founder of a company called Modularity Grid. We're a startup that's focused on equipping companies that are deploying renewable energy assets with essentially AI-enabled software, with the end goal of bringing down the costs and complexity associated with monitoring and managing their renewable energy assets.
Great, thank you, Elizabeth. And Rosina?
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Rosina Norton, Head of Data Science and Analytics at MCOPA. MCOPA is a connected asset financing company who kind of came first into the market in 2011 with solar products in Kenya. And really kind of kickstarted the pay-as-you-go industry, for those of you who've heard that term before. The company has since expanded into Uganda and to Nigeria, and we're growing quite rapidly. And solar is our kind of core product, which we started selling on the pay-as-you-go basis. But it's kind of growing beyond that, as you'll hear. But yeah, I've been at MCOPA for a while now, leading the data science team, but even before that, I've been working in the pay-as-you-go solar industry for a couple of years, working with distributors across the whole continent who are selling solar products as well as other ones. So kind of bread and butter is the pay-as-you-go clean tech sector. So really excited to be part of this panel.
Thank you, Rosina. And Rosina and Elizabeth are very humble. Rosina works for one of the biggest solar companies in Africa, which is changing the face of the industry. And Elizabeth was part of the Google for Startup Black Founder batch, which is one of our best program and very difficult to get in. So really, really glad to be discussing the topic today with you, ladies. All right. So we'll start with the first question for Elizabeth. And here, as you've been working on, your company focuses on renewable energy assets with integrated AI software. I wanted to know from your experience and maybe from examples of work that you've been doing, how do you think AI is actually helping the energy sector in Africa by collecting data and predicting issues? So yeah, tell us a bit about how you think the sector is evolving, and also I think great examples of your work just for us to be able to make it a bit more concrete.
Yeah, great. Well, that's a huge question actually. I suppose when it comes to energy, there are the energy industry broadly, regardless of whether it's Africa or anywhere around the world, really, it's a very traditional industry that historically has been super resistant to change and super resistant to adopting new ways of doing things. And that's mainly because of the sort of high upfront capital expenditures that they would have had to make into huge, sprawling national grids. And so making changes aren't necessarily the easiest decision, or the easiest things for people to go for. But what has been changing over time has been that there are unique problems in the African context, in addition to the sort of overall problems that the industry has of sort of centralized approach of doing things, but kind of localized problems that I would say, you can't necessarily say across Africa in general, but, different countries have their own challenges that are very, very specific to their grid or the way they bring energy to people. But then there are a few kind of common things. So firstly, for example, you can say, the costs of energy is one really, really huge barrier from the perspective of who can actually afford the energy, therefore who can be connected to the energy, how close those people are, whether they're in rural areas, whether they're in cities, also impacts whether they can access energy at an affordable price. And so there's a lot of kind of that discussion about whether energy should even be profitable, or whether it's something that governments should, a bill that governments should expect to foot. And so what makes Africa particularly interesting at the moment, as far as energy is concerned, is the fact that there is this new decentralized energy model, and that can be divided into, let's say, on the smaller scale, where you have rooftop solar, where individuals have had to go out, buy their own energy generation and storage kits and put that on their own roof and generate their own energy. And then you have contexts where you have companies going out, buying hardware, the sort of infrastructure that you need, so solar, batteries, and installing it, and then supplying electricity to an entire town, to a village. And but now, the challenge that comes with a private company doing something like that in a very traditional industry where things are typically done very manually in a very human intensive manner means that you essentially, if you want to go from having your equipment, your assets in one location, and you want to kind of increase, you've got the capital to go from one location to 100 locations, you will also have to do a second thing, which is have 100 different teams, one for each of those locations, to be based there, have the expertise that's needed about, understanding of batteries, inverters, and all of the different components, knowing how to operate them, handle maintenance, the whole thing. And if you want to go from 100 sites to 1,000 sites, etc., the challenge becomes bigger and bigger because of this heavily human-intensive approach. And so that's kind of where we come in by providing essentially a set of hardware and software, so sensors to collect data from all of these different types of components, specifically data about the performance of these components, the health of these components, and then we use that data to help with scheduling of maintenance, identifying problems that could lead to the failure of the components or failures at a network level, and really with the end goal of making it a lot less of a burden for these small, typically quite small private companies that are going out there and trying to deliver energy solutions. So that's kind of in terms of the off-grid context. But if you now look at the grid context, that has its own other can of worms, because we typically have these grids that are all about excess. You generate as much energy as possible, plug it all in, and that's the only way to guarantee the fact that if someone switches on the light bulb, switch it on their lights, the light bulbs will actually go on. But this kind of approach of excess and delivering an excess of energy doesn't necessarily work in a country where you don't necessarily have the sort of capital available to invest in the energy generation infrastructure to be able to deliver that type of excess. And so we're seeing that, a lot of these grids are quite vulnerable, and so the utilities end up struggling to deal with energy management and making sure that energy supply is reliable. But that is where there's perhaps a particularly exciting but still open challenge around using AI to actually improve the management of large grids. And that is, obviously an opportunity that's not only in the African context, it's an opportunity everywhere, because in other places, yes, they may already have existing grids, but then there are new challenges coming to be, like people are getting EVs, so the predictability of when people are going to be charging their cars, where they're going to be charging their cars, becomes a whole other issue. And that isn't necessarily just a problem in developed countries, it's also a problem in the richer African countries or in the capital cities of most African countries, where people are beginning to buy electric vehicles. And we actually did a really interesting project recently, which was funded by the British government innovation agency, Innovate UK. Specifically, this allowed us to kind of imagine what electric mobility could look like in rural Africa and how our technology could play a role in enabling that. So it was a bit hacky. We got some secondhand electric, some secondhand sort of just regular motorcycles, and then added an electric motor and a battery, and voila, we had a little electric vehicle of sorts. So we built a motorcycle. We also built an ambulance, a 3-wheeled ambulance. But alongside of that, it really gave us the chance to demonstrate also how the importance of understanding the state of charge and state of health of all these different batteries that need to be charged, and then understanding the amount of electricity that's being generated, that kind of monitoring capability, how it can help with better scheduling of when you should charge and when you should not be charging, in order to make sure that a small standalone energy system can still meet the needs of a community, as well as charge these types of vehicles. And I actually think there's a lot more to see around this space, because we're moving into a world where we all have to be a lot more conscious about where, what type of energy we use, where our energy comes from, and having fueling stations in rural areas is probably not the way to go. They're already not there, but maybe we can just leapfrog that and have a scenario where people have EV charging stations and just have little simple EVs like the ones that we very, very quickly and easily built. And perhaps we'll see more of that around. So I mean, I hope that kind of that was really broad. I mean, there's so many different types of challenges across the industry, and each one of them can be tackled from a very different angle. But AI certainly has a huge role to play in solving some of the problems.
Thanks so much, Elizabeth. I think you gave us a great and broad explanation on how actually AI can help scale the energy system, which means more access for Africans, but also kind of go beyond just energy into, for example, mobility. This is very, very, very exciting. Thank you for this great answer. Moving to Rosina, now that we spoke a bit about the core of the energy systems and the assets, MCOP actually does something a bit more expanded with financing. So can you tell us a bit about how AI actually support all the operational efficiency and finance in clean tech? So here you can tell us a bit about pay-as-you-go and how AI can predict repayment behavior and all of kind of the ecosystem around pure renewable energy.
Yeah, thank you. Such an interesting question. It gave me a lot to think about in advance. And yeah, I'll probably focus predominantly on the pay-as-you-go kind of industry, because that's where majority of my experience is. But just jumping off the back of something Elizabeth said in her response there, I think one of the nuances of the African market is that the centralized energy model, which has kind of been the tradition in more Western markets, is just not looking like it's going to be the future in Africa. We're looking at decentralized, like mini grids, small home systems, like I think it's a growing industry, and we'll see what that looks like. But it's really exciting from that point of view. We're definitely seeing a new way of doing things. And pay as you go, solar is something that kind of kicked off a good 10 years ago, with M-KOPA being one of the first people in the field to make these small solar home systems accessible to people who'd been kind of underserved prior to that. So these are individuals who are typically far from the grid, don't have access to electricity, so their alternative energy source for lighting, etc., is kerosene and wood. And the pay-as-you-go solar industry really came in about how can we make these incredible products which give people access to lighting, electricity for charging, small electronic devices. How can we make these products affordable for them? And brought into the financing aspect to that story. So for those of you not familiar, it's essentially a financing model, which you can think of as connected asset-backed financing, where we have an IoT connection to the device. So that can be a solar device, or as we're seeing now in the market, consumer electronics like mobile phones, so that people can pay as they go. When they can afford it, when they want to use it, that's when they pay. So it's a flexible and affordable micropayments essentially, but connected physically via an IoT connection to the device, which can remotely switch it on and off, depending on whether they want to use it at that point in time. So that is a huge industry. And just to give some quick numbers, for M-KOPA alone, we have over 1 million customers. And over 10 years, we've displaced over 2 million tons of carbon and delivered like $400 million of savings to customers. So these are really big numbers, and that's just M-KOPA alone in the markets we operate. So it really is revolutionizing the clean tech sector in Africa. And as for AI and ML, so yeah, really exciting sector. As you can imagine, to distribute these kind of products, you're not just building products and putting them out into the field. There is a whole network of people on the ground who are going out there into the field and selling these products. Then once they're in someone's home, you need to service those products in line with what Elizabeth was saying, making sure that the batteries are working, the inverters, the control boards. And then also from a financial point of view for the company, you've put all of your capital and your assets upfront into that device and into the hands of someone and expecting them to pay back over time. So I see the pay-as-you-go industry having a lot of similarities, a lot of parallel to the fintech industry, actually, where we're kind of very focused on that revenue stream to make sure that customers are having a good experience and using their device, but as well that the revenue is coming back from those devices. So for AI in that sense, a lot of the work that we do is around forecasting, looking at those repayment profiles and understanding what are the drivers, what are making people pay, what are making people not pay, and how can we predict that. Not only does that help us from a customer service point of view, if we see that someone's dropping off or they're not paying well, quite often it's because there might be a technical problem, and you'll want to follow up with that individual to understand more. And we can also use other data coming in from the device, similar to Elizabeth, to kind of troubleshoot why that might be. But also from a company point of view, being able to forecast that revenue helps with budgeting, margins, debt financing, and even all the way up to fundraising. And this can be really important for new markets like this, where there can be a lot of investor risk and hesitation, and being able to use AI data through robust methods to show that actually, no, you don't need to worry about this. This is a successful industry. It can work. It operates effectively. It can be really, really powerful. So for all of the forecasting geeks out there, like me, it's such an interesting ML problem, because you're also having to forecast for hundreds of thousands of loans at a time. So unlike a simple forecast of like, what's my revenue for the year, you're thinking about what kind of algorithms can I use that can learn from this huge data set and also predict for a huge data set. So unlike the traditional banking industry or the microfinance industry, this is why I see there being more parallels with fintech, because we're working with big data sets, complex problems, which require not only the strong technical infrastructure to be able to deal and handle with those kind of approaches, but also the data science expertise to be able to do that. So obviously that's the finance side, but I do think it's worth pointing out that there's also a whole operational business alongside of that, where you're serving customers, you're there face-to-face with them day to day, on the phone with them day to day. And that's where AI and ML comes in really useful, again, for kind of optimizing those operations. So we can use kind of risk scoring of existing customers to come up with different operational strategies of, should we be calling someone or should we be sending them an SMS to nudge them on their repayments? We can do customer segmentation to look at the different kind of profiles of the people we're selling to and how can we cater different offers depending on what their needs are. There's Salesforce optimization, looking at what are the kind of levers you can help your sales force be most effective. There's the IoT side, in line with what Elizabeth was saying. And I think one thing that I saw on the agenda during this conference as well was a lot of stuff about NLP for these languages, which haven't been focused as much on. And I think industries like the pay-as-you-go industry are driving that forwards as well, because we have big customer care needs, and being able to service all these different industries, or these different markets and countries in their native languages is somewhere where I'm personally really excited about NLP as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rosina. It's actually quite exciting. It's also what you guys do is at the core of what Google does as well for other for other purposes. But I think we're all moving into kind of this predictive analysis era. I see in the timer that we only have 1 minute 30 left. Can we get another question, or should we wrap up?
You can get another question, I guess.
All right. So we had prepared 2 questions. So maybe Elizabeth, last question for you. So, you know, kind of moving broader, what in your opinion are the biggest gaps in terms of energy access in Africa, and how AI can help kind of close these gaps? And you know, if you kind of had let's try to think about if you had a wish list, and it could be really anything. It doesn't have to be necessarily, you know, because typically it's always, we need government support and this is not happening, we know. But if, you know, in a perfect world, what would be these gaps, and how can AI actually help fill these gaps?
Yeah, absolutely. I think just building on part of what Rosina was saying, you know, finance is a key thing. And so that's a huge opportunity, really, whether it's risk scoring, whether it's just better understanding the profiles of the different types of users, and building, you know, and essentially building in ways to improve that. Regulation, there is perhaps a role for AI there as well, more from the perspective of providing regulators with the data and the insights that they need to be able to make informed decisions, better planning. So a classic example of that would be, let's say, a country like Rwanda, which has incredible just sort of natural biomass resource in place, having a means of, let's say, using satellite imagery to be able to understand the amounts of biomass that's available could give you much better insights into how much energy can be generated in a particular region, in a particular season, when there might be gaps. And it could help them then plan and say, okay, perhaps this place could be better suited to, one location could be better suited to biomass, another location could actually be better suited to solar, based on doing some analysis on solar radiation that covers different parts. So just in terms of providing a means for people to make better decisions, that would be really, really cool. I would say also other challenges would be, I would say the bit that kind of people tend to ignore is technology, I would say, actually, because there's plenty of tech that works out there, but it doesn't necessarily work in the African context, right? Or it doesn't necessarily work in the specific context, the energy access context. And by this, if I refer to microgrids, especially microgrids, if you look at just because it's a microgrid doesn't mean necessarily that you can take the same battery that's been designed for a large grid scale and just shrink it and stick it into that. It won't necessarily work. You might actually need to be able to adapt that, modify that, and have a battery that's more designed for this context, one that gives you more information about how your battery is actually performing so that you can make a better plan in terms of what is being stored and what isn't. And so I would say there's a huge role to play for AI to play, really, in terms of just providing enabling technologies that allow the industry to modify the types of kit that are out there to work in the energy access context. But then also, of course, there's the operational side of things. Huge opportunity there in terms of really bringing down the complexity of different processes, because right now it's a super fragmented setup where you've got lots of different people working on different things, different workflows that are actually could use with being integrated. So I think that it's just a really exciting sector, and it's a brilliant time to be a part of it, because you literally get a chance to reimagine the future and then work towards building it.
True. Great points. I completely agree on finance, regulation, tech, and operational side. I want to add one, actually, is talent. We still eventually need a human workforce to make this machine work. And something that we lack a lot in Africa right now is talent, and in AI and machine learning. And glad to see that some of the educational institutions are actually focusing on this now. But yeah, that's definitely, I think without the human factor, nothing works at the end of the day. Super. I think we're at the end of the panel. Thank you so much for this very exciting conversation. You make me want to move back to Africa and work with you. So it is indeed an exciting moment to be here.